Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar, Richardson, and an incredibly special guest. We're looking to break all of the viewing platforms today. Billy Luicci of TexAgs is with us today. Billy, what is going on, brother? We're back. We're back in the same conference again after all these years. It feels so right, I have to say.
What better way to ring in the new conference? Welcome Texas in the SEC. You guys know I am the official welcome wagon for all Longhorns. But no, it's exciting. You know what? It was something that, you know, it was the shock value was off the charts. But a week into this thing, and it's like, you know, I'm assuming we're going to get it on Thanksgiving. And the idea of that game being played, I've always maintained, and Anwar and I have talked about this before behind the scenes, where I'm like, I want the game to be played, but I want it to matter. And I want it to mean something. So I was thinking that was going to be one day they meet in a playoff or a Sugar Bowl, or man, the Cotton Bowl sounded amazing. Jerry World, half maroon and white, half burnt orange. If it's an SEC football game, they're not much more meaningful than Texas A&M and Texas meeting on the field at Kyle or DKR in a Southeastern Conference football game. I just never thought we'd see it happen.
Billy, that makes two of us, because for years, Texas has always looked their nose down on the SEC. There was always this internal positioning that they wanted to rub elbows with the Stanfords and the Cal Berkeleys of the world, and that from a natural feel standpoint, they always viewed themselves as not fitting in with the SEC. It's fascinating to me how quickly that line of thinking has changed, and that one of the things we haven't seen is a lot of Texas pushback about making this alliance, which Texas fans won't want to say this out loud, but it's the truth. A&M made the right move 10 years ago. They made the right move for themselves. It's a better conference. It's the future. It has turned out to be the place to be. And I've been surprised that Texas didn't really have any pushback from any higher levels, lower levels, wherever, that it would be such a good marriage together.
It is interesting to see. And I've given a hard time, and Lord knows I've gotten it. And you guys know how we do on there. And there's trolling. And then when the shoe's on the other foot, you better be ready to catch it. And when it comes out that Texas is joining the conference, I just went, God dang it, here we go. And it was more about the abuse I was about to take on social media, but it's fun. And it has been funny to watch Texas fans and get so on board with it. But they made the reality is the Longhorns made the right choice. Texas A&M certainly made the right choice 10 years ago. This started, and I know there's a lot of conflicting stories here, but I'll tell you, the reality is this started, and I know Texas A&M and R.C. Slocum has said it, and Jackie Sherrill has said it, and they've always kind of fancied themselves, much like you said about Texas in the Big Ten, let's say. I go back, I think of like John Makovic bringing Texas up into the Big Ten. It would have been a perfect fit. With A&M, they always fancied themselves as kind of, man, they would really fit in the SEC culturally. And I think it's turned out where that's true. But Texas created this Pac-16 idea. They came to A&M expecting A&M to go and thought it was a great move for Texas, OU, A&M, and the others. And that kind of opened the door for the Aggies to say, you know what, tap the brakes on that. I think we're going to do this. And, you know, at the time, Texas, that was, I think, kind of the last thing they wanted to deliver, to go out all the way west, let A&M cast their lot in the SEC. So they kind of all banded together and kept it from happening. Then A&M got there, and it was the best choice for A&M at the time. I thought Eltife said it best. And I've actually been hearing about Mr. Eltife for a long time. Know some people in his family. I know what he's about. I knew he's a power broker in this state. And what his comment about what he said to A&M at the time, and I forget if he said it to Bowen Lofton or if he said it to the university president or one of the regents, I think he said, you know, A&M needed to do what was best for A&M. They did it. Texas had the Longhorn Network. I don't think them leaving for the SEC 10 years ago was the play. They can't base their moves off of Texas A&M. Texas A&M benefited. They're a much stronger football program and brand than they were 10 years ago. But I'm going to tell you, Geoff, I think Texas will fit into the SEC just fine. It just wasn't the most natural fit like you kind of thought A&M would be, or like maybe a lot of Longhorns thought the Big Ten would be. But, man, this just feels like it's going to be a hell of a run. And the one thing no Aggie has talked about, and even I hadn't said it until today, there is strength in numbers in the Lone Star State. And we don't like to think of the Aggies and Longhorns as partners in any way. But I don't know. There are ways that this does benefit both A&M and Texas for the two flagship, powerful programs, not only in this state, but in the country, to kind of be like-minded, because there's going to be a lot of instances where Del Conte and Bjork are very like-minded in what they're wanting to get accomplished through this league, that it's pretty difficult to be on an island by yourself in it. And that's something that I think A&M realized this week.
Billy, I want to ask you, maybe just from a recruiting perspective, you guys and Ketch, teams from the SEC have come into Texas and they just take who they want and they roll out. One of the issues that Texas has had is, from a recruiting perspective, it's been hard to sell the Big 12. So it's you either go to A&M or maybe you go to Bama or Auburn. But when you have two of these things that you're talking about, entities, SEC, does that become a strength in numbers thing, in your opinion, where it's like, I could go to Texas, I can go to A&M, and maybe Texas recruits start staying more so in state?
I think yes, and especially over time. Like, Texas will should get a really nice bump, because A&M, as you guys have talked about, we've all talked about it, A&M has been operating under this really significant recruiting advantage that they've never had against Texas, and it goes back almost forever. There was that brief stretch there in the probably mid 80s to mid 90s where A&M was right there on the cusp of being a power, but in the Southwest Conference, let's call them a regional power. But outside of that, it's Texas. A&M had never had a clear-cut advantage. And I think the SEC, with the way the Big 12 was trending, the SEC clearly gave them that. And look at their roster today. I mean, people get confused and think that Aggies think they're Alabama. The roster isn't Alabama, but I compare that roster to the LSUs, Floridas, and maybe even Georgias of the world. Like, they're up there in the SEC. They're up there nationally when you look at the classes they've managed to stack. They don't have that advantage over Texas moving forward. So that's something they'll miss, no doubt about it. And Texas will benefit from not recruiting from that. I think a handicap position. You guys, remember those old wrestling matches? There's like a handicap and the guy has to go in the ring 2-on-1 or one arm tied behind his back. That's what Texas had essentially signed up for when they stayed back in the Big 12. You just didn't know it at the time. But things being equal now, for A&M, what I've been telling Aggies is, hey, thank God you've got Jimbo Fisher. And thank God that A&M had the 10-year head start, because to go back to what you said, all Jimbo has done in his career is recruit top 10 classes year in and year out, whether it's Tallahassee, whether it's at A&M. He was a part of them at LSU under Nick Saban, at Auburn under the Bowdens. It's what he does. Texas is going to come in. Texas can come and join the top 10 party. If A&M stays in there, that's where they're at this year. They've got, to kind of prove that they've got staying power in there. Both these programs, I believe, and Ketch, you and I have been doing this since about the same time. And I don't know that outside of a season here or there, right? Am I wrong in saying over more than a year or two at a time, have both programs ever been up simultaneously?
No. Our guy, Chad Hastings, I think, did a stat that showed in the history of the two programs, the two schools have never both won, I think, 9 or more games in consecutive seasons together. I think that's the stat.
I believe it.
When Texas is good, A&M has historically not been good, and vice versa. And even like last year is a perfect example where it looked like, okay, maybe now we'll see this in consecutive years, and the Longhorns didn't quite have the season that they wanted to have, and the games that the season had been cut short.
Yeah.
But in general, this is new frontier on a lot of levels. But until we see it happen, we've never yet seen these two programs even good together. It's just weird how when one is good, the other one is just never quite as good, which means that we've never had a lot of games after Thanksgiving where the weight of a championship or a division spot in the Big 12 was on the line. That may be something that is completely different about this new marriage and this new union, because both programs have a platform, I think, that allows for them to be that good at the same time.
And I think to take that right back to what Anwar just said, if imagine Texas A&M now playing Texas in that game, Thanksgiving or the day after, whenever they do it, playing that football game with as a Southeastern Conference game with the spotlight of the entire college football world watching, and so much at stake. Yeah, I think a strong A&M and a strong Texas, that is how you can shut the doors to the state. And again, is it Jimbo and Sark working together? Of course not. But that's what essentially would end up happening without them both realizing it. It's just like finally we might have two heavyweights that capture everyone's attention, like what's going on right now in that division. It's been so long since anyone's cared about it. But now you get two or three of them that people care about, and you start having these mega fights and these trilogies and things like that. And we're finally seeing that at the heavyweight division in boxing. And to me, that's what could happen. Are they working together? Of course not. They're recruiting against each other as intensely as probably they ever will have. But the end result could be, Anwar, where kids across the state are going, man, I really don't have to leave. And that's been A&M's pitch for the last decade. You don't have to leave the state and can still play in the Southeastern Conference. That's going to remain their pitch. Texas is going to come on board with that pitch as well. And I think get ready, because the OU fans are here. They go. They're hyper aggressive on Twitter. It's like a community of tough guys that I've never. Longhorns, at least, it's like trash talk, and it's friendly and funny, and they'll make gifts that last 10 damn years and they're still funny, and they're on my friends' phones when I call. OU fans
talking about that pink thing.
Oh my
Billy.
God! And you know what? If I could say one thing to Orangebloods, that is funny. And if you guys don't know me and think I don't have this, that is funny. And I couldn't tell you how many of my buddies, when I call them, that comes up on their phone. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Somebody asked me on TexAgs, they said they showed that GIF minus the cartoon object, and they said, what would you tell this guy 10 years ago, knowing what you know today? And I would say, don't worry about it. That GIF will be outdated by about 2029, maybe. That's what I would tell him, because that thing. But no, it's and I would say, don't worry, you'll have 10 years without playing the Longhorns before that streak is broken. But no, I think, guys, OU is quite. I don't want to call anyone the loser in this deal. Not and not even A&M, as angry as Aggies were when the news broke last week. I think everyone in the SEC wins. The two new teams obviously are winners. But I think Oklahoma, I don't think they quite, I don't get the feeling they quite understand something. Those days, and look, OU's a great program. They're going to have years. I mean, A&M's had 2 seasons in the SEC in 9 years where they've gone a combined 20-3. Like OU's going to have years, but I don't think they understand how difficult it is going to be for them to come in here. And to me, instead of being the one, and sometimes the 1A, rarely, they're usually the one, where they're operating with this great talent advantage over the rest of the league, save probably the Longhorns, year in and year out. From a talent standpoint, OU's coming in here and going to be like one of 7. If Texas quickly rises up, they're going to be like one of 8. And that's just the truth. I mean, if you think about these teams that OU is joining in the conference, you can go all the way down to an Auburn in a lot of years. You know, Auburn's going to be as talented as the OUs, Texas and A&Ms of the world, and even the LSUs. And so you're going from one of one or maybe two to one of eight. And I think for a team that has been in the playoffs as much as they have, and a team that has won as much, I think they're in for the actual rude awakening more so than anyone else.
But let me ask you this though, Billy. I hear what you're saying, but could it be tougher on SEC teams where it's not like they'll get a month to prepare for a bowl game? I mean, you're basically talking about 3 to 4 days of preparation for an OU team, and Lincoln Riley, who, you know, Ketch and I have a high respect for him.
Yeah.
Does it give, you know, I would only differ with you a little bit, because I just think when you only got a few days to prepare for that guy and that team, it may not be as successful as one thinks.
Kind of the opposite of Tom Herman, right? And by the way, I do have a lot of respect for Lincoln, despite the dry fit Lincoln nickname, and that some Sooners get a kick out of. But
what about his brisket making ability, though? Do you have respect for that?
Also dry. Lives up to the billing. No, OU's damn good. We all know that. And again, like I was saying, they're not going anywhere, and they will win an SEC title at some point. There's no question about it. And they'll be contenders several years. I just think that day of just rolling through. But you're right. To me, Tom Herman, and talking to people that really knew him, even dating back to U of H and then at Texas, when he has a lot of time to prepare, he's lethal. He's really good. But during the span, and I don't know what it was, and you guys would have a much better feel for that than I ever would, during a week with those 3 or 4 days. And I don't know if it was paralysis by analysis, it was just too much overkill and the guys were pressing, or if it was too much to pack into that, you know, too much attention to detail. I don't know. But you're right about Lincoln. I think their biggest thing, though, is, you know, you've got Mike Leach in the league. You've got Lane Kiffin in the league. There is a little bit of a shift in terms of kind of how many teams are going to be playing that style. Don't forget, too, and they haven't looked like it yet because I don't think they have the personnel, but Arkansas with Kendall Briles running that offense, similar. They're all kind of from the same tree. But so I think actually the league will have to adjust some as this conference starts. I think OU comes in and makes a significant change, you know, that continued shift towards that style. Heupel over there in the East with Tennessee. So it's fun. It's pretty interesting to see where things are going in terms of style of play in this conference. But
hey, Billy,
they got to block, guys. They got to win the line of scrimmage, and that'll be the early test.
Billy, the thing I was going to piggyback off of that is that when A&M enters the SEC, it really was rock'em sock'em robots kind of football. And I think quarterbacks have been a big part of the SEC's evolution offensively. But even Alabama, the Alabama that Texas would have played in the national championship game in 2010 is different than the Alabama that exists now. Having lived through it, where do you think the conference is in this evolution of you win with, you know, strong lines up front, and now it's had a bit of like a super baby with wide open offense, and now the league as a whole is somewhat of a mutant baby of two of those ideas? Do you feel like it's kind of in the middle, or do you think it's trending one way or the other? Where do we think, as Texas enters, where's this league going?
Geoff, I really think it's in the middle, because I've watched it now for a decade, and I watched what did we watch the Big 12 for? Did I watch the Big 12 for 16 years for A&M? I think so. Yeah. And now a full decade that is coming up on year 10 for A&M in the SEC. I think it's the line of scrimmage league, as they call it. That is always going to be in play. And you look at the teams that won this year, and it was Alabama. You know, in the last couple of years, it's been Alabama, Georgia. Even look at LSU when they won the title. That offensive line was terrific. Joe Burrow was rarely touched. You look at their defense as their defense came on. I mean, they played Clemson in that national title game. Clemson couldn't block them. You know, Trevor Lawrence got off to a hot start. He couldn't block them. It's still a look at A&M this past year. It's a line of scrimmage league, but to talk about your mutant baby analogy, you better be able to score now. And that wasn't the case back in the day. You know, even when Johnny lit up Alabama in Tuscaloosa and the Aggies won, I mean, that was like a 29-24 game. That was a defensive football game with some tremendous plays by Johnny. 10 years later, you know, look at the Alabama offense. And they even had, I think they had, did they have Amari Cooper at that time and AJ McCarron? And then they had Ridley, but it was still Yeldon and Eddie Lacy. And, you know, they were still in that transition. Now, yeah, you can line up and win. Look at Bama last year. You can win with Najee Harris and 5 NFL O linemen, but you better have the explosive element. Even A&M, who people talk about as not being explosive, they got into a shootout with Florida. And if they didn't score 41 points, they're losing that football game and they're sitting at 1-2. And our conversation might be a lot different today. So I think, Geoff, when you talk about that convergence of styles, my answer would be you better be able to do both, and you better be able to stop the run and get after, you know, better be able to stop the run and have DBs that can cover, because the talent at wide receiver, you guys are coming from the Big 12 and you're going to go, oh, this looks a lot like we used to see in this league in terms of being able to throw the ball and complete it 40, 50 yards down the field.
Anwar, Billy, before we start wrapping things up, I just have to say, I have to get something off my chest. Anwar, I think both of you guys are going to be surprised.
Okay.
Because I'm going to admit 2 areas where I was just wrong. And when does that ever happen?
I was kind of wrong. I'm going to raise my hand. I got, you know, I had a lot of people trying to get me on freezing cold takes this week. I think, was it like 9 days ago? I said, they'll never get into the SEC.
So you've already, wow, the rare 9 days later freezing cold take. That's an accomplishment. No, I was way wrong about the Pac-16. I was you looked at the TV markets in that league, and forget for a moment whether or not those markets are crazy about football, which is what I've always thought SEC fans rightfully would point out. Like, what good is the LA market if LA doesn't care about college football? But you could put together a league of 16 schools and a dozen of the best markets, TV markets in the country would be in that market. And from a growth standpoint, you could see where I think on paper it made a lot of sense. And I was a huge advocate for that. And all these years later, I was way wrong. A&M got it right. They got it right. The future ended up being that the cool kids table was in the SEC. And really now, with all due respect to the money that the Big Ten makes, there's no league in America that has the infrastructure in place, especially from a talent standpoint, to have Texas and Florida sandwiching the rest of the conference. You're just taking, I think, 9 or 11 of the most densest football creating, NFL player creating areas, and it's all in one conference. And I didn't see it quite a decade ago that this would be possible, but I was wrong. The other thing is, I think I've been living in denial for a decade. For a decade, I've told myself, I'm okay without the Aggies. It didn't matter that I'm the original Aggie troll, that no one for longer has been making A&M fans mad on the internet, and really vice versa with you, right?
Yeah.
Like, we go back a long time.
And some would say I was in denial throughout the 2000s to 2010 decade.
But I've been in denial that I've missed you guys. And I didn't know until the conversation came up 10 days ago, 11 days ago, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute. I can be in their lives again. They can be in my life. I have really, nothing has made me feel more like trying to be a troll than to poke Aggies when they're not in the same conference and Texas isn't playing them. But in the last 2 weeks, it's been like running into a family member that I haven't seen in a long time. I feel like it's my best friend's wedding and Julia Roberts goes back to see her college friend for the first time since college. And she's like, oh my God, I love this guy. That's how I feel about the Aggies. I have missed you guys.
A&M reference in that movie, by the way, too. My Best Friend's Wedding. One of the rare pop culture references there. And I don't remember, I guess, what's his name? Dermot Mulroney. Is that his name?
Yes.
Is he an underrated actor, or just there was nothing better during that time period?
I think he's just kind of a guy.
Kind of there.
Yeah.
He's no Brendan Fraser. Let's put it that way. No, I think, listen, to go to what you're saying, the last 10 days or so, it's been like a jolt of energy. And I remember the day after it broke, when we were in SEC Media Days, by the way, you guys can't wait for that. You don't realize it yet. That is an awesome time. Just sitting in the hotel bar there, you're in the middle of Hoover, Alabama, Birmingham, and you're just sitting there in the hotel bar and sitting around with people from around the SEC, the network, the national media, and just sitting there, every night for 3 or 4 nights. It's a hell of a time. And doing all the radio from around the conference and the country, it's a spectacle. And that's something you guys absolutely are going to look forward to and thoroughly enjoy. It's an event. But sitting there and Feinbaum's coming on the day after this happens. He comes on our radio show and he sits down, and before we go on, he goes, "You just made a lot of money." And I said, "Well, I don't know about that," but he goes, you're going to have a hell of a lot more to talk about. That's for sure. I go, "That is absolutely true." And that day was just the start, and it's carried on for like 2 weeks. Anwar, like you said on Twitter the other day, when you mentioned me, and you're like watching Liucci battle it out for 24 straight hours. And yes. I mean, like, I'm one that, Ketch, this, and I don't know if it's the Italian in me but I will just argue and argue and argue. And, I can be taking an L. You have to come off and like pull them off of me or something, but I'll keep going. 24 hours. I told Anwar, I said, 24 hours. Like I'm intending for this thing to be like the next 24 months. And it is fun. And I've been really vocal about not wanting to play Texas. And the reason why, and I've heard y'all talk about it kind of, and the reason why was because I just felt like in that Big 12, in that setup, and people misconstrue, like when I say Texas needed the game, it didn't mean Texas football had no chance to win and they were going away if A&M didn't play them. I meant their desire for that game was greater than A&M's desire. Their benefit of playing it was greater, in my opinion, when A&M was in the SEC than A&M's benefit of playing it. I felt like it was like Vegas. So Texas was the house in this instance. And that's why I think CDC was calling for it so much. And they were in a no-lose situation to kind of publicly talk it up. If they played 4 times, A&M needed to win 3. If it was 2-2, I thought it was win Texas. If it was 1-1, win Texas. So why would you willingly enter into something like that when you didn't have to? Now that you're in the same conference, both teams benefit the most by a win. Both teams are hurt the same by a loss. Let's get it on. And to go back to what you're saying, hell yeah, I'm excited about it. We all grew up on this. Most of us going to Austin, coming to Kyle Field, the intensity, the football hatred, the love of sitting around Thanksgiving and watching the game. The first time I watched that game, Ketch, I was a senior in high school, and I watched A&M Texas, and we were at the house, and our family friend's daughter was a freshman cheerleader at Texas. She went to high school with, Sam Adams and all those guys. Shane Rink was playing for the Horns. So we're watching the game. I had been to my first bonfire 2 nights earlier. I'd been accepted to A&M in Texas. I was going to study engineering at either school. They were both great. Had no ties to either one. I'm from New York, moved to, Houston when I was a little kid. No ties to either school. And I went to bonfire with my buddies that were going to A&M, had never been. I was like, wow, this is amazing. The next night I'm watching the game with a bunch of Longhorns, and I'm going, man, Marcus Buckley picked 6 on the first play. That place is going nuts. And just something in me said, man, I would love to be there right now. And that's why I went to A&M. It was literally a coin flip. And I went to A&M because of the Texas A&M football rivalry. And I had watched it one time before that. It was a year before, I think, with Bucky Richardson. and A&M went for 2, and Brian Jones, our man BJ, was on that team, that Longhorn team. So that game, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it affected my like whole career path. And it was just because I'd been to Bonfire, and that rivalry affected where I went to school and kind of which way I went. So it's a big deal. And like you said, we kind of ducked it, dodged it as fans of both sides. Like, yeah, we don't really want it. We like them being away, whatever. Now that it's back, and let's be honest, it's being like forced on everybody. But I think it's only taken like 2 weeks. And I think even most Aggies that I talk to really embrace it. And I know this, and you guys know this, the Aggie and Longhorn football players, no one's happier about this than them. And I hope that the guys on these current teams get to play in it. And I'm pretty sure they will pretty quickly.